No course on digital literacy can be complete these days without talking about generative AI. So, in this final module on the digital literacy skills for educators, we will take a broad look at the relevance of generative AI for educators. So, broadly, we will come to the same page on what generative AI is and try to put it in the context of education. And we will dive straight into understanding how educators, right, faculty members, course instructors can use Gen AI for course preparation. And how do we use Gen AI for enhancing student learning, right? After all, that is the goal of any educator. And of course, now there are lots and lots of ethical issues that one should be aware of, both as an instructor as well as a student when we are using Gen AI technologies. And finally, we will talk about a few tips for implementation. How do you take this forward? How do you take this into the classroom? So let's start by trying to understand what is generative AI. Even before I move further, right? So the now Gen AI is the way to call generative AI in short, right? So it has become such a common parlance. Now, even before we try to understand what is generative AI, let us try to understand what is AI, right? So what has been the general development of the technology surrounding artificial intelligence, right? So, if you just look at a very basic definition of artificial intelligence, we can call that as the ability to give machines the ability to mimic human intelligence, right? So, when you're talking about human intelligence, we are talking about everything from the cognitive level to the physical level, right? So that is where when you talk about the physical level of intelligence, then we get into the robotics kind of fields, whereas when you are talking about the cognitive aspects of it, we are talking about the ability for it to think, take decisions, and so on. So when we look at the traditional AI, right? So firstly, I would like to tell you that although AI is having the biggest hype currently, as a discipline itself, it is not new, right? So the earliest work in the field of artificial intelligence happened as early as the 70s and the 80s, right? So that is where now we can use the term called traditional AI, wherein we try to have the machines learn lots of patterns about the data by telling it over and over again, saying that if this is what it is, and this is what it means, and this is how you interpret it. Right, so one classic example of this kind of learning is expert systems, right? So in the expert systems, people used to take the human intelligence. One of the first expert systems was in the field of medicine, and a system called MySyn, wherein they tried to encode the knowledge that the doctor is having in the form of lots of if-then rules. And you try to train the machine by saying that, okay, these are the scenarios. If you encounter, this is the kind of outcome or output that you should provide, right? So that is, it is more about trying to understand the patterns from data, and that a whole exercise is referred to as training. So we do a lot of things with these trainings. We try to do predictions, right? So we try to understand from the past learnings, past history, what can we predict about when we encounter new situations, new scenarios, right? So a lot of forecasting applications use artificial intelligence these days, right? And we also talk about classifications, right? So when a lot of specific pattern of usage of some equipment or some say credit card or banking transactions, right? So there are lots of patterns that are happening. Then you will be able to classify them, saying that, okay, this is a safe transaction, this is possibly a fraudulent transaction, and things like that, right? So like that, there are many traditional ways of looking at artificial intelligence, right? But let us jump straight into understanding what is this generative AI, right? Or Gen AI, as we say it, right? So now what we are saying is that already the machine has learned how to classify, how to predict, various things. Now, generative AI takes it to the next level by saying that now you have already created a model. Model is essentially an understanding, right, of one particular field, one particular domain, right? So once you have understood that particular model, now if I want to generate new content, right? So that is the important part to understand here, right? So what the first step of generative AI is to create a model, right? So that is where we keep hearing about these various models that many of these, including OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, right? So all of them have come up with their own models. So what is that model? What they will do is they will go through billions and billions of documents and content and try to understand and create a model of what the existing content is all about. Now, once that existing content is there, so whenever a user wants to create new content, so now it knows that pretty much I know everything that is there to create. So it will try to use these combinations of existing content to predict what kind of an output that can be produced in response to a question that is being asked, right? So which means that, so the question from a terminology point of view in Gen AI, the question that a user is asking is called as a prompt, right? So you ask, so you can, in the slightly earlier version, we used to call it as a search string, right? So you go to a search engine, you put in your query, that used to be called as a search string. Now in the Gen AI context, we call it as a prompt. We don't call it as a search engine because we are prompting it to generate new content. Okay. Now, what makes the Gen AI so exciting, right? Now, the technology is rapidly growing, rapidly improving, and the initial versions of Gen AI focused on generating text, right? So you try to give it a big 100-page book or an article or right, and ask it to summarize it for you. It will generate the text summary for you. But then now it has extended beyond multiple models. Now we are talking about Gen AI capable of generating text, generating speech, generating videos, generating images, and all combinations of this, right? So that is where the technology is heading, right? So that's why Gen AI is the most exciting and most talked about technology these days, and we cannot look the other way around, and we have to pay attention to it and see how best we can leverage its capabilities. So as a course instructor, right, as an educator, how is it that we can leverage, right? So one of the first benefits of where you can leverage is in the preparation of the course, right? So you can basically start with the lesson planning itself, right? So when we are talking about the lesson planning, it includes the ability to generate the syllabi, right? Now, why do you think we should trust Gen AI to do, to help us for lesson planning? So when you try to use Gen AI for lesson planning, say on a given topic, say suppose I am saying, now I want to teach database management system to a first year undergraduate student, right? So please prepare the syllabi for that. So what it will do is that, as I said, there are models that are being created by analyzing billions of documents, and there are, among those billions, there are probably thousands, if not another million, such syllabi document of database management systems, around the entire open content. You may be wondering, why should I trust Gen AI to do the lesson planning if I have been doing it all along, right? So you may be an experienced faculty member who has been teaching the database management course for so many years, right? Sure, you know your knowledge is definitely invaluable, and we are not trying to say that you allow Gen AI to substitute your own knowledge. What we are trying to say is that since these models have been created by analyzing in this specific context other course syllabi offered in other institutions, not just in India, not just in one part of the one specific region, but in the entire world. Now we do understand that there would always be different ways of looking at a particular subject. So in that context, so if you trying to use Gen AI for lesson planning, we will get the benefit of best practices that have been followed in other institutions, right? No, once again, this is by no means we are trying to say that Gen AI is going to, plagiarize or copy paste information from other institutions and say, there you go, you use it. It is not going to do that. So the way it works is it is going to use all the publicly available information and try to tune it for your requirements. The second major use of Gen AI for course instructors is content creation, right? We all like to use slides as part of our classrooms, and we also like to give the students lecture notes, right? So once again, we are not saying that you completely give this task to Gen AI, but what happens is over a period of time, we have been teaching a given course, say for 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years. It is very much possible that the slides have become a bit outdated. So this is where Gen AI can help you update the existing course material, the course content that you have created. It can give you updated notes. It can give you updated slides. It can make corrections to your own slides and so on. So it has got that ability. So content creation, obviously, Gen AI is generation, right? So we should take full advantage of its ability to generate content. The third important activity is activities generation, right? So now we, in any good pedagogy, so we talk about, learning by doing. We want to give the ability to learn to the students, by doing activities. And we all know that the activities generation, when I say talk about activities, one simple example of an activity is an assignment. Right? So it is challenging to keep creating newer and newer assignments, and we definitely don't want these assignments to be passed on from seniors to juniors and so on. So we want the students to gain that experience of working on new assignments and activities. And beyond a point, manually generating it becomes quite challenging and maybe sometimes a little boring as well. So this is where Gen AI can once again help you create, very creatively new assignments and activities that you can use in your classroom. Of course, once you have created these activities, since you have not created the activities by yourself, we would also like to know what is the best way to evaluate these activities, these assignments, homeworks, and so on. So you should also use Gen AI to create evaluation rubrics, right? Because sometimes it may so happen that if we create the rubrics by ourselves, we may not consider all dimensions associated with the rubrics. Because we know that, for example, even if you take the Bloom's taxonomy, for any body of knowledge, there are things that have to be remembered. They have things that need to be understood. There is a need for the students to do something, right? The ability to apply, right? So when you use Gen AI to create these rubrics for you, So it would have incorporated those things in the activity, and it will remind you to say that, okay, do evaluate whether they are using the right terminology, right? Whether they are showing their understanding of this particular concepts correctly, and this is how you can evaluate, and so on. And of course, finally, the best practices. As I said, all the content that is generated by GenAI is drawn from, by parsing and going through, millions and millions of documents, right? So, which means that you will have the ability to leverage best practices that are followed in other institutions, which you can actually incorporate into your own course. Let us now turn our attention to the students, right? So how do we enhance the students' learning experience in the classroom when we are teaching a course, right? So from a student perspective, right? So what are the things that the students can gain, right? So one is that in class these days the classrooms are becoming ever so large, right? So we talk about classrooms which have 60 students these days, at least on an average in a typical engineering institution. But then I have seen much more fundamental courses having students in excess of 150, 200, 250 students. So one downside of such large classroom experiences from a student's perspective is that the level of interaction that is possible in a small class with the instructor is not going to be possible. So from a student's perspective, so the student has to be able to assimilate what is delivered in the larger context inside the classroom, and then use generative AI to get a much more personalized explanation, personalized understanding of what was delivered in the form of a lecture in the classroom. So this is absolutely invaluable, because the way generative AI works is effectively it can be turned into a personal tutor, because if I were to quickly distinguish between a search engine and a generative AI tool such as say Gemini or a ChatGPT or anything like that. So the biggest difference is that it is highly interactive and contextualized to the person who is asking that question. How does that compare with say a search engine, right? So a search engine gives you only one opportunity to ask a question, right? So even if you look at, if you have used, I'm sure you have used generative AI tools. So there is also an explicit prompt says, now please ask follow-up questions. It encourages you to remember the context, remember the conversational. That's why they are also called as conversational agents, right? So you are able to converse by making it remember the context. So that is why this gives a much more personalized experience to the learners. You can also, force the generative AI to simulate many scenarios. You can force it into role playing, right? So if you are talking about, say, you want to practice communication skills, so you can make it into a role playing activity, wherein you can ask the generative AI, GenAI, to play the role of an interviewer and ask you questions, ask the student the questions, and student can respond, and it can tell whether it is good or bad. And we can even switch, right? So we can also have some fun trying to be the interviewer and trying to challenge to what extent GenAI is able to respond to your own questions. So that also enhances the learning experience, right? So by adding a little bit of fun element into it. And also, right, there are only certain, so many activities that you as a teacher can give, right? So the way the students can use this is also to generate practice problems before the examination or before the lab activity or whatever, right? And of course, as I said, in general, if not for technical subjects, these can be extremely useful to improve the communication skills of these students. Okay. These days, we also encourage students to do lots of projects, right? And as if you have the burden, you as an instructor have the burden to hand out 60 different projects in a class of 60. That's extremely difficult, right? So we have great difficulty in trying to distinguish, create different projects, and so on. So so this GenAI can be used. You can encourage the students to use GenAI for brainstorming and even come up with ideas, even project ideas, right? So if you are talking about an internship, or if you are talking about offering, writing a proposal, right? So you can ask the students to work with GenAI tools for ideation and creating new project ideas. Well, all of these things are extremely good and extremely nice, but you should be aware that while the GenAI train is chugging along happily, so there is another set of activities that are happening in parallel, where they are trying to put a leash to the ability of GenAI, right? So why do we need to puts any leash on these GenAI tools, right? And the usage, because the biggest concern that is also cropping up are the ethical considerations, right? So as a course instructor, you have to be cognizant of it, and also you have to make sure the students are also aware of these things, right? So the most important first step is to ensure transparency and create that mutual trust, right? So mutual trust between the learner and the instructor, right? So what do we mean by mutual trust, right? So we should, course instructors should not be in denial, saying that, okay, I will, no, if you have used generative AI tools for creating those assignments, it might as well be told, right? Because now nobody is going to believe you if you have generated 60 different assignments on the same topic, in a class of 16. If you don't admit that you have used GenAI, nobody is going to believe it. That's where the loss of trust comes in, right? So it is perfectly fine to be forthcoming about how you as an instructor are using GenAI or going to use GenAI, right? So that is important to know, right? On the other, if you are planning to use GenAI to even evaluate answer scripts, for example, or activities or assignments, it is good to be upfront about it, because as I will be talking about it shortly, right? So we should understand that GenAI itself is not perfect. So to that extent, it is good to welcome feedback from the students themselves on your own usage of GenAI. So that greatly enhances the mutual trust that exists whenever we are trying to use GenAI in a classroom setting. Of course, plagiarism is a huge issue that all educationists are facing these days, wherein the students seem to be using it as a replacement for their own work. So this is something, it is probably a value system issue. This could be a cultural issue, right? To tell them that GenAI is useful more as a complement for the work and not as a substitute, right? Because even when we see, at the same time, it is also important, and obviously this is a little bit of a personal opinion, that it is not a productive thing to snatch away GenAI from the classroom, because it is very much acknowledged that even in the real world, when they start working, it is expected that they know how to use GenAI effectively, because at the end of the day, GenAI by the industry is being looked at as a great, massive tool for enhanced productivity. and efficiency, right? And so we'll be doing a great disservice to the students by not allowing them to use GenAI. But then, so how do you, it is your responsibility, it is our responsibility to tell them how to use it in a responsible way, how to use it to enhance, how to use it more efficiently, right? So normally I take it in two steps, right? So you try to tell them, that's the way we have even learned something like calculus, right? So we have differentiation from first principles. So we have to understand the first principles, then you try to mug up the formulae to solve, to differentiate in a more efficient manner. Here also it is exactly the same. So they have to understand the fundamentals. Suppose you are a programming instructor. Of course, they need to know the syntax of the language. They need to know how to stitch together the logic to solve a problem in a programming, right? Once they have a good understanding of that, then there will come a time. You have to tell them, you have to assure them that there will come a time where they will be allowed to use it to enhance the productivity, but not before they have mastered the first principles. Now, the third issue to consider, it is referred to as hallucinations, right? Now, hallucination in psychology is it is essentially considered as a disorder wherein people, people with this particular disorder start imagining things which are not indeed true, right? And this particular problem has been afflicting GenAI as well. Both as a course instructor and as a student, one has to be aware that GenAI is not perfect. Okay? So it may sound extremely confident. The output produced by GenAI might sound very, very confident. In fact, I jokingly say, so this is the most, sometimes, not always, sometimes GenAI can be the most confident liar you can come across, right? So that is something that you have to be cognizant. In fact, that gives us one more reason why one should know the first principles and fundamentals so that you are able to validate what GenAI is producing and throwing at you, right? So that is why it is important to emphasize the need for us to understand the fundamentals, right? So this is where I also want to sound a word of caution to course instructors as well, right? It may be very tempting to design a brand new course, right? Because GenAI is indeed having the ability to generate the lesson plan, generate the class notes, generate the slides, generate the assignments, and possibly even do the evaluation for you. But that should not lead an instructor to offer a course in which they don't have the expertise, right? Now, today everybody is talking about, say, quantum computing. Now, if you have not studied quantum computing, it is a terrible idea to rely on generative AI to create the course content, course delivery, and everything for you, including the lecture notes, right? On quantum computing, if you yourself have not gone through and obtained the expertise necessary to be able to deliver that, right? So that is something that's a word of caution that I want to tell, because, again, going back to the same hallucination, right? If you are not an expert of that particular subject, right, so you cannot be 100% confident that these hallucinations don't occur, right? So what it is generated, you need to be able to validate. Now, a quick search on the internet will tell you all kinds of crazy generation content has been generated where there is absolutely no semblance of truth, right? So there were very famously, people have attempted to force GenAI to say that 0 is equal to 1, right? So those kind of fun things are happening, but on a serious note, this can be quite detrimental, and if not, so there is a serious ethical problem there as well if somebody is pretending to be an expert when they are not. So that is something that we have to accept and be conscious about. Okay. And finally, right, so when we talk about how do we overcome especially these ethical issues in a classroom setting. One is to firstly be open and transparent about it. So once you have established the mutual trust, draw boundaries, right? So draw boundaries on where it is not allowed and for good reason, and where is it that you are going to encourage them to use it, right? So this can be, the first part of it where it is not going to be allowed can be done in proctored assessments, and wherein you say that you have to know this without any assistance from anywhere else, right? So all along our examination systems have been relying on that, and there is no reason to change that, right, irrespective of GenAI. But having said that, so you should also have other moderated activities and discussion-oriented sessions wherein you talk about, you encourage them to utilize GenAI and discuss what is it that it is producing, and use your own expertise to comment on whether what it has produced is correct, incorrect, and where they should watch out, what are the pitfalls around the generations and so on. So this can be made possible by conducting moderated sessions, especially in a laboratory environment setting, wherein if the system has asked you to do something, you ask them to do that activity and then share with you, right? So whether it was successful, what are the challenges that it had, and what are the challenges that GenAI itself caused in that particular activity. Finally, so a few practical strategies, right? So there is nothing to be afraid of in terms of whether it will undermine the instructor's authority and so on. Start small, right? So start with low stake tasks, right? So lots of warm-up exercises. Maybe there need not even be activities, as I just said. Start in a discussion context, right? So throw open a small problem and ask each one to come up with their solution using GenAI, and you discuss about the suggestions that have been given. Now, even within GenAI, so when I keep saying GenAI, we are not talking about just one particular software, one particular tool, right? Now, there are so many different tools that have come about. So you can ask them to experiment with various ones, compare the output produced, and so on. Definitely, we need to have clear policies. So the policies have to be evolved. So this is where the faculty members should get together, and have a chat with the controller of exams or the head of the department and formulate policies. And I would even encourage everybody to formulate policies sometimes at the department level itself, because the kind of policies that may be relevant for mechanical engineering department may be very different from, say, computer science department, right? So the biggest problem that computer science faculty will be facing is regarding programming, right? So how do you deal with that? So the policies have to be very clear. And so whenever you are trying to do activities, you also draw the boundaries as to what extent, if at all, GenAI can be used for carrying out that particular activity. Sometimes you can tell them that, yes, please use it, but you have to disclose, right? So disclosing will also help us, help them as well to compare the output produced by multiple, applications of generative AI. Okay. And, as faculty members, we can be the role model as well. As I said, it is impractical, or, even the students won't believe if you say that you don't use GenAI. So we might as well embrace the same and be transparent about it. And we have to show them how to use it in a responsible way and use it for more effectively. Okay. And finally, it is more about sharing the best practices, right? Saying why certain tasks must be done without using any external assistance, know what are the benefits that they will get, right? So if they do so, and so these are some of the things that will always keep telling them that how anything that they are trying to do will help them in the future in their professional life as well. And we have to keep telling them that this has to be viewed more as a productivity enhancement tool and not a substitution for the learning itself, right? So which means that productivity enhancements kicks in only after the learning is complete. Okay, so finally, just to conclude, right? So we can, as course instructors, we can use GenAI to streamline the course preparation, enhance the classroom experience, outside of the classroom experience, and also we can, we can use it to prepare the students for the future of engineering, right? So because, as I said, now that is now an unwritten norm saying that people need the ability to use generative AI as part of the workplace. That is primarily because it enhances productivity, and productivity means time savings, and time is money for business, right? And we should also acknowledge that this is not a threat to pedagogy, right? So we should not be afraid that whether computer processors are going to replace professors. That is not going to happen. We should use it more as a complementary tool to enhance the pedagogy itself, and it can make our teaching much more efficient, effective, and even enjoyable. And of course, you should also start by exploring one or two applications in your respective courses. As I said, start small and gradually increase the extent of adoption of GenAI in your courses. And it is also important to share what works and what doesn't work with your colleagues, right? And as I said, this is one area where the policy of usage of GenAI, it cannot come top down, right? It has to go bottom up by considering the experiences and the inputs of various people who have tried to use it in a classroom setting, and that has to feed back into the policy level in a bottom-up manner for it to be more effective, and to ensure that best practices are shared, and secondly, you have greater compliance. All right, so that is essentially what I wanted to share with you regarding generative AI. Thank you.